I think one of the things I've learned on this is how immense this data set really is. The Library of Alexandria is a common metaphor for projects of this type. I think it's a bad metaphor because there's no way the Library of Alexandria was this extensive. I think that this thing shrinks that compendium of knowledge.
Welcome back to UVA Data Points. I'm your host, Monica Manning. In today's bonus episode, we're featuring a conversation between Lane Rasberry, the Wikimedian-In-Residence at the UVA School of Data Science, and Lloyd Sy, a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of English here at UVA. In this conversation, Lane and Lloyd take a deep dive into the expansive world of Wikidata and ask the existential question, what makes a person? Or more specifically, what data points make up a person? To help answer this question, Lloyd developed a large-scale data model of the biographical data contained within the Wikidata platform. It's this project that serves as the foundation for their conversation. Additionally, they take a wide view of biographical data as it pertains to research in academia. This includes the process of gathering this data, the ethics of utilizing this data, personal ownership of the data, and much more. So the conversation is not limited to only this project or even to the Wikidata platform. Anyone interested in these concepts should find this discussion valuable. And so with that, here's Lane and Lloyd.
Hi, my name's Lloyd Sy. I'm a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of English here at the University of Virginia. I'm in my 6th year. I'm completing a dissertation. It's almost done. The dissertation is about deforestation and indigenous literature from around 1820 to 1930. That work doesn't have much to do with my Wikipedia work, which I've been working on since, I believe, January of this year. We've been studying various things about Wikipedia, primarily related to the topic of demographic profiling and demographic ethics. Other than that, I don't know. I'm from Northern Illinois, and I like baseball.
Thanks, Lloyd. You are perfect for this project. I'm Lane Rasberry. I'm Wikimedian-In-Residence here at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. Lloyd, tell me about this project, WikiProject Biography on Wikidata. What was this about and what did you do?
So WikiProject Biography, as far as I can tell, is about assembling information about how we might describe a human being through data. What I worked on was the quote-unquote data model for WikiProject Biography, which is a list of properties that describe the human being. So to think of it another way, if you have a human being and you want to describe them, which properties do you use? There's obviously an infinite amount of ways to describe them, but some properties may be more salient or more universal than others. And I think those are the ones that we were trying to list, identify, and provide examples of in this model.
I love how you said, as far as I can tell, this is what the project is about,
Sure.
and then you actually set up this data model. But that's the way this is the way Wikipedia works, of course.
Yeah.
So you went into this and you checked out profiles or records of humans in Wikidata, and what did you see? And then how did you use that to compile this model in the project?
Well, like I said, what we were trying to do was come up with a list of properties that human beings might be described with. Certain properties every human being can be described with.
Like what?
For instance, I'll start with something contentious, gender, right? I don't know if it's actually appropriate to say that everybody has a gender identity, but let's just say the vast majority of people have a gender identity, and with most people, it's readily identifiable. Race is something, but maybe I'll start, for a less contentious thing, everybody has a height, right? And this is not always well known with people, but theoretically, every single person has a height. So one of the first properties I listed was height, and I found where that property was described on Wikidata, and I put it in our data model, and I attached a particular person with their particular height to that property. So I began very general. I found things like, say height or occupation or race or gender, all these things that are usually well known about anyone in the public eye. Then there were more particular things, right? For instance, if you're a member of the military, one way to describe you might be your military rank, right? I don't have a military rank, being a civilian, but a soldier definitely has a rank, and that's almost always publicly available. If you're an athlete, your particular sport or competition is a way you can be described.
You might have a height also.
You likely have a height.
Height would be less important for a non-athlete, perhaps.
Sure, exactly. And so the data model attempted to account for these more specific kinds of human beings. I just kind of, over the course of a couple of weeks, thought about all the ways that people can be described.
Okay, let me back up.
Sure.
Why is Wikidata compiling this kind of information? Why did Wikidata already have these records associated with humans? And now that you've compiled this list, this data model of all these different properties that Wikidata tracks, what can a person do with this list?
It's a good question. I think the place to begin is to describe what Wikidata is.
Let's do it.
And I believe that you could probably come up with a better description than me, but I'm assuming you're going to want me to describe Wikidata.
Give it a go.
I think Wikidata, from my perspective, is the single largest and most comprehensive database ever compiled, or at least ever compiled publicly. And by that I mean other databases focus on a particular field or a particular topic. You know, you might have a database of baseball players.
Mm-hmm.
Wikidata is a database of everything.
What does everything mean? What's in Wikidata?
Anything you could think of, right? There's an entry on Wikidata for things that might reasonably lend themselves to description through data. There's an entry on Barack Obama, for instance. There's an entry on the city of London, for instance.
Okay. Cities?
But there's also an entry for to take an example that's meaningful to us. There's entries on particular scholarly papers, right, that maybe no one has read. There's entries on the smallest mountain in Uruguay, right?
Every mountain.
Every mountain, probably. I don't know.
Yes.
On lighthouses, right? On obscure novels.
So buildings, novels, publications, people,
everything,
cities.
Literally everything, and things that are abstract too.
Like what?
Joy or
Okay.
angst, or impressionism, or a particular sub movement of impressionism.
Okay.
Everything that you can think of is described in Wikidata, and all under the auspices of a single umbrella, right? It's all within one data set.
The Wikidata data set.
The Wikidata data set.
Okay.
Yes.
What does a person see if they look up one of these concepts in Wikidata?
You'll see something that I believe is intuitive, but that maybe is not intuitive if you're not used to looking at data. You'll see a list of basically boxes, and the boxes will generally have two things: the property and the way in which this entity fulfills that property.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So let's let's pick a person that I like.
You mentioned Barack Obama.
Okay, we can go with Barack Obama. You go into Barack Obama's Wikidata entry, and you will see gender, male, race, African American, height. What was he, like 6'3" or something?
Okay.
Alma mater, Occidental College and Columbia University and Harvard Law School. So sometimes you can have several fulfillments of the same property, and so on, right? And most ways you can think about describing Barack Obama will be listed on the Wikidata entry for him.
All right. What's the point of publishing information in this way? What good is it to have this information in Wikidata or to know that this information's there?
Wikidata is queryable, which means that you can easily ask the database questions and it pops out answers.
What kinds of questions?
Well, if we're sticking with Obama, you might ask the question, who are all the African American politicians who came to office before 2012? And Obama would be one of the people who you get in this data set, but you'd also see a list of a bunch of other politicians. Maybe you get a sense of a particular demographic.
So can you go through that again? So that query,
Sure.
What information has to be in Wikidata for that to work?
Okay, so for instance, I took the query, who are all the African American politicians who came to office in the United States before 2012 or something.
Okay.
So in order for Wikidata to be able to answer this question, the database needs to have certain features. It has to have entries on the politicians. It needs to know their race. It needs to know the fact that they're politicians. It needs to know when they came to office. It needs to know where they came to office in America, right? And it needs to know all those things to send this back at you.
And so if there's records for all these people and it has this data for them in Wikidata, and then someone presents the question to Wikidata, then what does Wikidata do in response?
Well, the way you ask this question is you assemble something called a query. Queries are written in a particular, I think you'd call it a scripting language. Maybe it's not a scripting, a query language, Ours is called Sparkle, I believe. It looks technical and complicated, but once you get the hang of it, I think it's a fairly easy thing to manipulate. You submit a query to Wikidata, and it pops back out at you a data set, a table.
The list of the people who meet
the
that.
list of the people who meet that criteria. Those criteria, yes.
All right. Is this just for people, or what can you query?
No. You could do. I mean, you love to talk about the largest city with a female mayor, right? You could ask all sorts of questions, right? But let's try something really esoteric, right? Like, could Wikidata give me a list of all of the people at a university who identify as women, who are not white, who went to a university located in a Pacific Northwest state, and who were born after the year 1950.
Is this
I guess we're still talking about people, but
can Wikidata answer a question like this?
It can. Well, it can, and it's dependent on, I suppose, several things.
What circumstances?
It's dependent on the data set being complete, right?
All right.
For instance, you couldn't answer the question I just provided if we don't have any information about the alma maters of professors at a university, right? So it can answer the question so long as the data's there. But yeah, otherwise it can answer the query.
Who puts the data in Wikidata? Where does this data come from? How does a person know if the data is actually in Wikidata?
It's a good question, and a lot of the people who contribute to Wikidata are people that I don't personally know. It's people who, for some reason or another, decide to take a data set and have it undergo a process called curation, which is they clean it up and they somehow input it into Wikidata. Right? I don't actually know how one does that at a large scale, but like Wikipedia, famously, Wikidata can be edited by anyone. So if I go onto an athlete's page and I notice that the page does not list their height, without I think even registering for an account, can edit the data, edit the page, edit the entity's descriptors, and add their height. So I think it's people who, anyone can edit it. So anyone can upload a curated data set. And I imagine much of the data on Wikidata comes from people who have worked on these large-scale data sets.
Right. Like in the case of athletes, there's so many people with sports statistics. The Olympic Committee or different sports teams, they put out data sets about the athletes. Those can come into Wikidata. You were talking about schools, alma maters, where did people graduate from? Universities themselves put out lists of people, their faculty, their profiles. This stuff comes into Wikidata. So back to WikiProject Biography in Wikidata. You set up a data model there. Tell me again, what is a data model? What did you set up? And what does this look like?
A data model is a list of all of the qualities with which we might describe human beings. Now, again, that is an impossible ask. There are an endless amount of ways that you could describe a human being, and especially once you get down to the nitty-gritty of like different occupational descriptors, it's impossible to list them all. We tried to list, say, a representative sample. We tried to show basically that you can break down human beings into a list of different properties.
All right. You tell me, what properties did you find? Let's go with some general categories. Like, can you break these down into categories?
Yeah, sure. So I think one category I had was like biographical descriptors. When was a person born? When did the person die? Where was a person born? Where did the person die? Where was a person buried? How tall are they? How much do they weigh? I think those are the things that who is their father, who is their mother,
okay, so
who are their siblings,
family relationships
things like that.
As well.
Yeah. So those are all things under biographical descriptors. You might get other things like related to, I don't know. We haven't talked about religion.
Tell me something about that.
So obviously, one thing you can list about a person is what religion they practice. But I think there's a separate property for maybe like what worldview they hold, or what
Like an ideology or philosophy?
an ideology or philosophy. I believe vegetarianism might be under one of these sorts of systems of thought, or practices. But you see, like even with religion, like once you get down into the more specific things about how people are described, like take Catholics, right? You can describe them by the particular order of friars that they belong to, and perhaps you can even describe them based on the rank that they hold within that order of friars. You might describe them based on the places that they visited, in the past. So it's truly endless, right? And we were just trying to pick a representative sample.
What happens if there's a Wikidata record for a person and you don't know their religion? Then what happens to that property in that case?
Well, it's just not listed for the person. And if you query based on that particular property, then they won't show up.
I see.
And maybe this is what I was talking about with data sets and being incomplete, right? Let's say I wanted to find out a list of all the Muslim faculty at UVA. I'm assuming that that's not publicly available for a lot of people. And so if I ask that question to Wikidata, I might not get more than like one or two, if any,
Depends on how many people have publicly declared this.
Depends on how many people have publicly declared it and if that publicly available information has actually been put into Wikidata, which is not a guarantee. Right.
About how many properties did you identify, and how did you identify any of these properties to put in this list that you created?
I think we identified about 100, maybe. You told me to start with, I think, 30, and then I just had fun, so I kept on going and got to 100. And at the beginning, it was fairly easy. I was like, well, I know everyone's going to be described via their mother, father, height, all these things. But then, once you start getting further into it, for me, it was a matter of looking up people to begin with and seeing what properties that they were described with that I hadn't put in my data model. And for instance, when I started thinking about military people, I went onto General Douglas MacArthur's page, right? And I saw that there were all these Wikidata properties I hadn't expected, like campaign served on, right? Or military award received. So then I put those into the model.
So if you're not a military person, those things just wouldn't be on your profile.
Yeah, I mean, most civilians haven't won a Purple Heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other surprises? What other people did you find that had unusual properties tagged to them?
You'd never guess the stuff that Wikidata editors come up with, What's a good one? Do you have the thing up? I mean, hair color is one that I was thinking about, right? Hair color as applied to fictional humans,
So this isn't just real life humans. This is also fictional humans.
Well, this is more of a philosophical debate, right? But like arguably fictional characters are also bound by the rules of biographies and they have identifiable aspects.
Okay,
right?
so they might have a gender, they may have an occupation, they may have served in a military campaign and won an award.
Yes.
All right.
In the case of hair color, Tintin has red hair, and that's listed. Who would think that there's a data set that has this stuff? I'm looking through other sort of surprising things. Okay, ancestral home, So one of the categories that I worked on was race, ethnicity, and nationality. And so that's trying to describe various properties that describe where a person is born, where they currently live. And when I started looking at a lot of Chinese people, I saw something recurrently, which is ancestral home.
What does this mean?
It is, according to this descriptor on Wikidata, the ancestral home, the place of origin for ancestors of the subject, right? So, for instance, Sun Yat-sen's ancestral home is in a province called Dongguan, and that's a way with which you can describe someone, which I'd never even heard of.
So this could mean where is somebody from, but this has a particular meaning in Chinese culture, and many Chinese people want this as part of their record.
Sure.
Okay.
Or, I don't know if they want it, but it is publicly available.
It's publicly available in any case.
So it's worth pointing out enough to be publicly available. Yeah.
Anything else that was specific to a community or culture that you saw?
Many things, like take academics, right? Doctoral advisor, Erdos number. Are you familiar with this concept?
Yeah. Explain it. What is it?
There was I believe a Hungarian, is that right? A Hungarian mathematician named Paul Erdos, and he was very prolific. So he wrote tons of papers, so many papers that he collaborated with tons and tons of people. And your Erdős number is in a way describing how many degrees of separation you are from Paul Erdős. So I think he's dead now, so it's unlikely that, a scholar working in mathematics beginning today has an Erdős number of 1, but it's likely that their advisor worked with Erdős, or maybe their advisor's advisor worked with Erdős. And so that's a descriptor that's entirely confined to the specific community of mathematicians, right?
But something that's important to this community
Apparently.
that they publicly remarked upon.
Yes.
And
is on Wikidata for most mathematicians. Yeah.
Other stories like this? Very interesting.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me look through this, blood type. Apparently, you can find the blood type of various people. Let's see. Just okay. This is one that you might not think is described well. Criminals are often described on Wikidata.
In what way?
Okay, so here's a property of under my section called criminality. Number of victims of killer, right? Investigated by, their specific criminal charge, what they were convicted of, right?
Of interest to people who follow true crime stories?
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
I hope there's not a community of serial killers out there, But yeah. So for instance, this guy named Yu Young Chul, who I don't really know, killed 20 people, and on his Wikidata, you can find a property called number of victims of killer, and for him, it's 20. Yeah. So presumably, one of the questions you could query to Wikidata is, give me a list of all the people who have killed at least 30 people.
All right.
Yeah.
Of interest to some people. And how does this relate to Wikipedia? Could you say something about the relationship between Wikidata and Wikipedia?
Yeah. So I think formally, and you know better than I do, they both fall under this thing called the Wikimedia Foundation, right? Which is which runs or organizes a series of various sister projects: Wikipedia, Wikidata, Wikimedia, right? I think I use Wikisource. I love Wiktionary, which is, I think, the best dictionary in the world. And it's as I understand it, Wikimedia is just devoted to making knowledge free and open to the public wherever you are in the world, as long as you have an internet connection, right? Wikipedia is by far the most publicly known and famous of these projects. It's an encyclopedia of various things. Wikidata is a way to take all of that encyclopedically described information and break it down to structured data. So the relationship is sometimes you see something on Wikipedia that's not on Wikidata, and so you can create a data element on Wikidata based on what's said in the Wikipedia page. So in a way, like Wikipedia's information can filter down to Wikidata. I imagine it might also go the other way sometimes, where information first appears on Wikidata and then finds its way to Wikipedia somehow. I'm less familiar with that process.
So it's a hot topic still being determined,
Sure.
but some interplay between the two. Now that you've compiled this data model, and it's possible to query a number of people by their crimes, number of artworks from an artist, number of publications from an academic, all these other things, how would you want anybody to respond to this? What would you want anyone to do in reaction to this? And answer it for what would you want the wiki community, Wikipedia editing community to know about this? And what about to non-Wikipedians, people on the outside?
I think the Wikimedia community needs to really consider how ethical this is. They already are considering this. It's not like I'm the first person to be like, there should be ethics. But it's publicly available information, right? I mean, I don't know if everybody wants to be described. Certainly nobody wants to be described completely, right? There might be a Wikidata entry for like, the mistress of this particular person, and I imagine people don't want their affairs coming out into public. And that's just an extreme case. But there are all sorts of, there's private people who don't want any of their information to be available on Wikipedia and especially available on Wikidata, because if it's on Wikidata, then you become sort of obviously and manifestly a collection of organized aspects, So I hope, and I know that it's already going on, I hope Wikimedia community members really ask themselves, what are the ethics of this, and when is it okay? What are the boundaries for us to list data and to put data up on the internet? Because this is all, again, public and available. I hope that the public takes it seriously, because it's an enormous project, and it's a project of great significance. Maybe the greatest collection of data ever assembled in one place. So the public should join in on this conversation. Basically, the public should be on Wikipedia, in Wikimedia, also talking to people about I think I'd want, in particular, those who have privacy concerns to talk about what specific privacy concerns they have. Yeah.
If somebody were to enter Wikipedia and want to join one of these talks about privacy or social issues or ethics, what would that look like? How does the wiki community talk about these things among themselves, and what does it mean for someone who's not in the wiki community to go into the website and then join one of these conversations?
It's incredibly easy, and also it can be daunting. It's incredibly easy because anyone can make a Wikipedia profile and start editing. I mean, you don't even need to have the account to start editing, right? But I don't know if I actually told you this, but I first created a Wikipedia page when I was in 7th grade.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah. I was a 7th grader on the internet, and as I said, I love baseball. And I found somehow on Wikipedia a list of baseball player pages that had yet to be created. Mostly it's clear someone was doing this alphabetically, and so a lot of the Z's were not yet taken. So there was a player for, I believe, the Boston Americans, which is a team that is now called the Boston Red Sox, in the very first decade of the 20th century. His name was Guy Zinn. And as a 7th grader, I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool if I knew how to make this page. And that page is still up.
Wow.
And it's my prose after 15 years, mostly, And it's just a list of, like, how many RBIs he had. It's nothing special. But, it's still up there. And, no one's had any the point is that a 7th grader could do this, right? And I made a page, and I started editing Wikipedia, and I created something that's still knowledge to this day, right? To actually discuss more philosophical matters of the kind that we're talking about here, it's important to note that every single Wikipedia and Wikidata page has a talk page attached to it, which is a page, if you're looking up on a desktop and you see the tabs at the very top of the page, you'll see talk page right at the very top. And if you click on that, you'll see various Wikipedia users who care discussing, debating, arguing contentiously or otherwise about things on the page, And there's discussions that go nowhere. There's discussions that haven't been answered in years, But potentially every single site, every single article is the starting point for some discourse. Beyond that, with wiki projects like this, which sort of I suppose live outside of actual pages, you can discuss more specific topics, right? Any example would do. Let's say there's a WikiProject Canada. I'm sure there is. You can find it very quickly, and that is a community of Wikipedians who care about topics and articles relating to Canada. And maybe they have a discussion going on right now about how we can, better edit the pages of Canadian, policemen or something, and you can join in that discussion. I say it's daunting because sometimes these discussions are things you've never thought about before, like I wouldn't know how to contribute to WikiProject Canada, even something that I do care about, like WikiProject Baseball.
Yes.
I'm sure they're talking about topics and they have very strong opinions on them. But I don't yet. So it's easy for me.
You're still invited. So
I am still invited, yeah. But not every party that you get invited to is one that you can talk at, So it's both incredibly easy to join and maybe difficult to feel as though you're making an impact. That's my perception as a kind of incipient Wikipedian.
Tell me what it was like putting together this wiki project. Like, how did it feel to do this? What's it mean to compile this list and then put it out there for the wiki community? Is it intimidating? Were you comfortable? Were you shy? What did it feel like?
Well, you got me involved on this. I think you started this, right? And from the beginning, you told me that people hadn't really touched this topic because it's way too difficult to try to encapsulate the human being, through a list of properties.
I didn't want to touch it.
Well, then you had me do it, right? And I think the part that we were most, say, concerned about was with every single property, we had to list an example, right? So I gave the example of Sun Yat-sen, I think, whose ancestral home is Dongguan. So how did I pick Sun Yat-sen, right? I had to ask that question for every single property, right? Like if I'm saying that there's a property called father, and it's exemplified by this thing. How do I pick this thing?
I should have asked you earlier, where do these properties come from? Who writes these properties?
These properties, I imagine, were begun at these properties were created at the beginning of Wikidata. Some of them were, like when the Wikidata project started, people were probably asking themselves, how do we describe things? How do we describe people? And some of the more obvious ones came to mind immediately, like, we're probably going to need a property for height. We're probably going to need a property for, sibling or date of birth, right? And I imagine people started creating entries. I don't know anything about the history of Wikidata,
It's how it happened.
Yeah.
Everyone just made it up.
Right. But then, to take the ancestral home example, I'm assuming at some point, like, some dedicated set of Chinese Wikipedians or people who know about China were like, ancestral home is a very important quality, right? So we should have a property called ancestral home. And it grew organically. But maybe to this day, one's thinking about properties.
Yeah, you listed a lot of properties. Of course, I don't know the story of all of them, but that's how they're made. Some dedicated group of people says we need a property for such and such. They talk it through.
Yeah.
The property gets created, and then it gets applied to people or concepts or whatever the case may be. And they all have a story.
Yes.
It's one of those talk pages.
Yes.
You can go and see the people talking about why this property is so important.
Right.
And then it's right there. So you assigned people to these properties or give examples? How did you choose other examples for these properties? And what kind of example are you talking about?
So with every property, we have several. So the WikiProject data model is like a table,
yes,
right? And the column headings on these table, first I list the property's name, then I list the property's alphanumeric identifier on Wikidata because they all have alphanumeric identifiers. Then I list the description of that property. For instance, you might not know what an ancestral home is, so there's a more detailed description in the third column. The fourth column holds an example of this property.
And how did you choose the examples? You said about Sun Yat-sen, but what about the other ones?
Largely, I would describe the process as controlled chaos, right? I wanted to get representation of people. You identified a problem for me, which is that when we talk about data, we often use mainstream examples so that everyone knows, right? It just so happens that often those mainstream examples are white people, or they're more often men than women, right? Everyone knows that there are underrepresented groups in every aspect of life. So my goal was really to use different examples for every property to achieve diversity in many, many ways: racial, sexual orientation, gender, nationality, fictional versus non-fictional, right? Contemporary, dead, alive, I just wanted to get a full, a representative roster of human beings from every aspect of life.
It's a massive undertaking.
It's also one I certainly failed, like I'm sure I missed out on something, like I don't know if I had any Argentinians, right? But I tried, and that was just drawing on my own sort of knowledge about people from different places. And, sometimes I was like, well, I haven't had a woman in a while. I wonder what woman would be a good descriptor for this property, right? Or I haven't had anyone from Australia here. can I think of any Australians? You know,
All right. And what if somebody sees your list and they feel left out? Like,
I'm sure there's people who do feel left out. You know,
what should they do about that?
well, they should complain to me. You know, and that's the point of the talk page, right? Like, let's say I didn't list anyone who was trans, right? Let's say I didn't list anyone who was from South America. A trans person or a South American should note that. And then we can replace one of the people with an example that's more representative. I think that's a good practice, you know?
That's how Wiki works.
Yeah. It should, I mean, a project as encompassing and diverse as Wikipedia should seek to be diverse and representative in all of its facets. Yeah, I think.
That's great. Anything else you have to say about WikiProject Biography on Wikidata?
You know, I think one of the things I've learned on this, through the various things I've worked on with you, is how immense this data set really is. You know, it's the Library of Alexandria is a common metaphor for projects of this type. I think it's a bad metaphor because there's no way the Library of Alexandria was this extensive. You know, I think that this thing shrinks that compendium of knowledge. I'm someone who cares a lot about knowledge, and I care about knowledge being publicly available. This is just about the best project there is for that. And so it's inspiring constantly. Yeah.
You were really the right person to put this together, Lloyd. Thanks so much for your contributions.
Thank you, Lane.
And thanks for talking with us.
Yes.
Thanks for checking out this week's episode. We'll have a link to Lloyd's Wiki project in the show notes. Music for this episode was created by Kevin MacLeod, and links to his music can also be found in the show notes. We'll be back on December 1st with a conversation about sports analytics. We'll see you next time.